Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Hashim Kumar. Austria's mainstream parties have clinched a deal to form a ruling coalition after inconclusive elections 5 months ago. The new government will exclude the anti-immigration and pro-Russian Freedom Party, even though it is the largest group in parliament. Joining us to explain what is happening in Austria is Melanie Sully, Professor of Political Science. Professor, welcome to TVP World and thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Elsa.
So I'd like to start with a short soundbite and then I'll get your view on it.
We have not tried to negotiate our way down to minimal compromises. We have deliberately combined the ideas and priorities of all parties into a common programme for the future of Austria. We have succeeded in reaching a compromise that moves Austria forward. Making compromises is an old and proven Austrian virtue.
An old and proven Austrian virtue, Professor. How reliable is it, though? In other words, how stable is this coalition? It took them 5 months to form, after all.
Yes, it's the longest time in the history of Austria since the Second World War. It was a very complicated negotiations. They broke down several times between different parties. At one stage, I mean, it looked really like a Viennese operetta and a very amateur one at that. You've just seen firstly the new chancellor, the head of government from the Conservative Party, and he was a very surprise candidate for this job because the former leader of the party, who led the party into elections, resigned. This candidate suddenly appeared, much to his own surprise. He'd never intended to be that. And he conducted these negotiations with the second person you saw, the head of the Social Democratic Party, who will be the vice-chancellor. And he was considered far too left-wing for the Conservatives for a long time. And now they've sort of cobbled together a coalition agreement which is seen by many in Austria as a bit of an experiment because they've also included the small Liberal Party. It's the first time in Austria this combination has been in government. I think there will be a lot of relief that actually there is a government now, but not a lot of hope that it will last the full legislative term.
Not a lot of hope, Professor. Now, share with us, please, what were the things that brought them together? Was it simply to keep the right-wing party out, or is there a true foundation of commonality there?
Well, as you said, Austria has a long tradition of compromise, consensus, working together. So these two parties I mentioned represent what they call the social partners, so employers on the one hand, trade unions and labor on the other. And they dominated the politics of Austria since the Second World War. And this is broken down over the decades, and there have been Green parties and the far-right party. But this tradition was what the federal president appealed to at the beginning of the year, when it seemed a pretty hopeless situation, and said, look, we've just got to get together and form a government. This is getting ridiculous. And it was also about keeping the far right out, although it must be said they kept themselves out. They were almost on the brink of forming a government with a Chancellor of the Republic. And then they said, no, thank you, we can't do this. We don't like this agreement with the Conservatives. And so the thing is they got together, these three parties that now will be in government for those reasons, and also because they were running out of options other than holding another election in which the far-right party could have become even stronger.
Right, OK, we've got another short soundbite I'd like us to have a look at, please.
Ja, It has to be said openly that what seemed impossible at the beginning of January has now become possible. Perhaps also because we have realized in recent weeks how important it is in such difficult situations, in such uncertain situations, in such volatile situations, to simply be prepared to take responsibility with all the consequences that entails. And obviously, not everyone has always been willing to do so. And I want to be honest. We are honest. These are going to be tough years. 2 tough years.
Das werden jetzt
2 tough years. What do you think she means?
Well, they mean that they have to rescue the budget, budget deficit, violating the Maastricht rules of the European Union. This was the new foreign minister that we saw there from the Liberal Party. They have 2 seats in the cabinet of the new government. And it was this person who, at the beginning of the year, decided to break up with the negotiations for these three to actually go into government. And now they've sort of had a renaissance and like phoenix out of the ashes. They appear again to say to voters, "Oh, we've made up our differences." But I think there are a lot of tensions in this coalition government. But a lot of them, like the Liberal Party, we just seem to like the idea of being in government and obviously having ministries. That will be an incentive to keep the boat floating.
Right, okay. So now the FPD, the right-wing party, is asking for, FPO, I beg your pardon, is asking for a snap election. And you suspect that if that were to happen, they'd come out even stronger. So what is it that the Austrian voting population said they wanted that only the FPO could provide?
I think they thought that there would be more security, tougher measures on asylum seekers, reduction in abuse, and also there have also been, very sadly, knife attacks by extremists in Austria. This has unsettled the population. It looks like they're still riding quite high in the polls, but I think that enthusiasm could subside, because after all, they did have a chance of getting into government. Why should anybody vote for them again if right at the point in which they could form a government, they say no thanks? And it depends very much on how this government get its act together, but it will be quite tough, as the lady of the Liberals said, because there will be some cuts made, and everybody's going to have to tighten their belt quite a bit, and this is not going to be very popular, which may have been a reason, of course, why the far-right party said we don't want to have anything to do with this. They don't want to be unpopular.
Understood. Okay. So talking about the platform, if you like, that the coalition is currently presenting, it sounds as though there are quite a lot of similarities between what they're saying and what the FPO wants, aren't there?
Yes, particularly on cracking down on asylum seekers, creating sort of what they call return centres for failed asylum seekers to go to whilst they're waiting for deportation, and also suspending the family reunification for asylum seekers. Some of these things are taken right out of the book of the far-right party, but there are big differences in foreign policy. It's a coalition agreement which states very clearly that and condemns the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine as a violation of international law. It pledges to send support, humanitarian aid to Ukraine. For this purpose, there will be a Ukraine coordinator. It supports totally the EU position. It's very much in conformity. Supports the road to Europe for Georgia, also for Moldova, and supports the European air defense Sky Shield. So these are very crucial differences at this very unsettling time when the rule-based international order is being called into question. And they also pledged to increase the defense budget to 2% by 2032, which is not very ambitious, doesn't sound very exciting, but for a neutral country, this is at least a step forward.
Understood. Well, how would you compare Austria's forward-thinking approach to foreign policy with that of Germany, certainly under Chancellor Scholz, but, well, we don't know how the new leadership is going to behave?
Well, as I said, they're not going to be sending troops on the ground in Ukraine because as a neutral country, but they do work within the NATO Partnership for Peace. So there could be support for humanitarian projects, reconstruction, democratic capacity building. This is the soft power that Austria can provide as a neutral country. And countries like Germany, France, Britain are now strengthening their hard power, their military equipment and defense budget, which by law Austria cannot do to that extent. But they are fully on board now with the human rights, for example, international law, which would have been very much in question under the far-right party that wanted to loosen sanctions on Austria and would have actually been promoting disruptive governments as a part of its main policy.
Understood. Professor Sully, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you so much for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day.
And you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. That's all from this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.